available per the funds that are distributed to this region, and there are no unmet transit needs, then that LTF is distributed to all the communities for other purposes such as streets and roads. Now, unmet transit needs, what they essentially are is they're not trips that duplicate existing services. So they're not for services, say that there's an existing route out here in this community and someone would like to see maybe additional routes that would run the same route as an existing route. Well, we can't do that. That's not an unmet transit need. And also, it's not for any service that's beyond the fiscal year of consideration, which is beyond this year of consideration. And secondly, the determination it has to be reasonable to meet is essentially based on certain factors which are outlined on this slide, saying that the need cannot be something that would generate a service that would cause the system to fail, or that would not meet certain system-wide criteria that would otherwise, by implementing the service, cause it to fail. So those are kind of some of the criteria that our policy board looks at when determining whether or not there are unmet transit needs that are reasonable to meet in this region. So where we're at right now in this process is, as I had mentioned before, is we have already held one public hearing in the Modesto region at the StanCog Policy Board meeting in November last year, and now we are holding a public hearing in the city of Patterson on January 29th, starting at 6 p.m., and that meeting essentially is designed to capture the community inputs from the western region in Stanislaus County for those who might not have been able to make it to Modesto's hearing in November. What we've done to kind of announce this hearing, and what we've tried to do, is we've announced it in all the local papers, both in the West Side Index and also the Patterson Irrigator paper. We've also announced this in the Modesto Bee and Vida en el Valle papers. We are going to be making visits in the next couple of weeks to the congregate meal sites here in Newman, Patterson, Grayson, and the other portions of western Stanislaus County. We have included this notice in the utility billing for the city of Patterson, and we also are conducting outreach through our through the START buses. We are posting flyers about this unmet transit needs hearing in all the routes that are coming through Newman, Patterson, and the western region of Stanislaus County. So that is something that we're trying to make this public hearing in Patterson known so that we can elicit responses from residents here in Newman, Patterson, Grayson, Crow's Landing, all portions of western Stanislaus County as part of this unmet needs process. And with that, I have some general contact information. If you have any residents that have any questions, or if you hear anything about unmet needs, please feel free to contact either myself or my manager, Rosa Park, and we are essentially the contacts to help any residents that has questions about the unmet needs process. And one last final announcement that's not on these slides is StanCog is in the process of preparing our regional transportation plan and sustainable communities strategy, which you'll be hearing from your staff in the later weeks, and also we'll be sending some more information to the city clerk for distribution to your council. But essentially, we have some upcoming events for that RTP SES effort, which we do have a meeting on January 22nd at StanCog offices in Modesto, which is 1111 I Street, Suite 308. And that'll be for our notice of preparation of an environmental impact report for our regional transportation plan and sustainable community strategy for this region. And then we also have an actual public workshop for the RTP SES that'll be held on January 30th. And that location is still yet to be determined, but we will be sending your information to your city staff to distribute to your residents and also the council for your information. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Any questions or comments from Mike? Seeing none. Thank you, Mike. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, we'll go to item B, presentation by Stanislaus County Public Works Director, Department regarding Oristimba Creek draft interim feasibility study / environmental assessment / initial study. Matt?
Thank you, and good evening, Mayor, council members, Mr. Holland, Mr. Hallinan. I appreciate you allowing me to be here this evening. I do have quite a few slides, and I have a handout, and so I'm going to move fairly quickly through them. There's about 50 slides, but there's a take-home, so you can really study it if you like later and call me. But also feel free to stop me on any slide if you would like to discuss it further. Supervisor DeMartini sends his regards. He's actually at a conference with regard to his Stan Sarah duties, so he's out of state actually. With that, we'll start off here. A little history of the Oristimba Creek and the flooding issues. So in the study area, the city has flooded 12 times since 1932, and I have a graph that shows which years those were and some more detail, with significant flooding in 95 and 98, and probably many of you were in the area during that time, so you may recall some of this flooding. With those substantial floods, we initiated a feasibility study in 1999. Feasibility study is a study with the Army Corps of Engineers that's essentially an environmental document. And to construct any kind of a project in California, you need that environmental entitlement. You need to review the environment and to ensure you've mitigated any impacts. And so that's the Corps' process, the feasibility study, to conduct that environmental review and also to develop a preliminary design. So that was started in 1999 with a scoping meeting in 2001. And fast forward 2012, and I didn't quite do the quick math there, but that's quite a few years, right? From 99 to 2012, here we are with a draft report. Now that draft report just hit the street on Monday, and it's out for a 30-day review by the public. In fact, I believe 2 copies were FedExed here to the city. I think there's one in your library, and I believe maybe one in City Hall, with some additional copies coming standard mail. So it'll be here within a few days. The Army Corps is the lead on it. It's a federal document, and they're the federal agency. So that's a little bit about the history and where we are today. Now I want to talk a little bit about what the issue is, what the problem is, and what are some of the possible solutions. So I'm going to start with the watershed. The watershed area consists of 134 square miles to the west of us, up into the coastal range there, into the valley. Crow Creek is an additional tributary area that flows into Oristimba. It includes 27 square miles. And then the alluvial fan, which is closer to the city of Newman, the downstream area, consists of about 45 square miles. The study area that we're studying, in fact, it's kind of hard for me to see on that screen. Hopefully your screen, can you see the detail on your screen a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay. So the study area is essentially bounded on the east side by the San Joaquin River. On the southern side, it's really the county line, a little bit south of the city of Newman. On the western side, it is essentially Interstate 5 and does go up into the valley a bit. And then obviously there is quite a bit of critical infrastructure in this study area. Just some of it is the 2 substantial canals, the California Aqueduct, the Delta Mendota Canal, Highway 33, there's a rail line, of course, transportation corridors, roadways, and then, of course, city facilities, including emergency response facilities. This is an interesting table, and I'd like to stop here for a moment. This is the history of the Oristimba Creek. And the line, and I'm going to point to it with my pointer, the line right here represents 5,000 CFS, and it's the point where the city starts to flood. And so anything that went above that line is water that got into the city. And there's actually 12 instances where it got into the city. One of them is right on the line. So, in fact, if you've ever heard us talk about the Oristimba Creek project, we normally say 13 floods in the last 50 years or so. And it's because we count that one because we think it got a little bit of water in town, but it was right on the edge. But you can look, and if you look very closely, and maybe even better on your paper, you can see the years that the city flooded, with a couple of substantial ones right in here. And we're going to talk about those here pretty quickly. So here's 1995. There was 12,000 CFS coming down the creek that event. The creek itself can only handle about 1,700 CFS. So nearly 10 times the amount of water came down the creek than the creek could handle. And so what happens typically is the water, as it flows down here, starts to spill out right around that Easton Road area. It runs along the CCID canal. It spills over the CCID canal or through it in some areas, and it hits the highway and the railroad tracks and runs straight into town. And so in 1995, there was substantial water in town that resulted in $5.6 million in damages, and including a lot of crop damages as well. Here's the hydrograph for that event. You can see the spike. It's just a very, very quick, almost like a flash flood. When that water comes down, it comes fast. Doesn't stay for too long. I think it was a matter of days, certainly not weeks or months. But it's a quick event, but very devastating. Here's some pictures of the area, and with the pictures I started up at the high end, up in the watershed, and this picture is actually looking up into the watershed, and then also looking at the sycamore woodland. And that was a hot topic for a number of years, because one of the alternatives, and we'll get to it here shortly, was to create a dry dam up in this valley, up in this area, just above the aqueduct and west of Interstate 5. But one of the larger problems with the alternative was the sycamore woodland. These trees are in excess of 500 years old, and from an environmental perspective was unmitigatable. Not to mention that a conservation group owns the land, and they weren't really interested in selling it to us. So that there was a couple of problems up there. Here's a view. This is actually looking downstream from that valley area, and you can see the canal. I think you can even see, I can't quite see it in my picture very well, but you can see some of the transportation infrastructure as well. This is a view looking upstream from Bell Road, and in the distance you can see the Stir Road interchange. This is one of the first roadway crossings that floods on a very regular basis. Here's a view of Easton Road. This is actually in a flooded condition. In 2007, we installed these, it looks like railroad arms, and I'm pretty certain that everyone here has probably seen these before. We put those in 2007. There was actually a fatality on the creek in 2006, and then one in, I think it was 2009 or 10. Someone drove around the arms and decided to get into the water, unfortunately. But here's a view of Easton Road. This is one of Jorgensen, and this picture is actually taken before the arms were installed in the summer of 2007, and this is how we used to close the road with just barricades. And by the way, I don't know if anybody saw, but over the Christmas weekend, we had quite a bit of rain. The arms came down on all three crossings. So the arms were down for about 3 days, I think it was. So I don't know if anybody saw that, but they're automated. It's pretty much foolproof these days, and so we think it's a good measure to protect the driving public. Here's a view of the railroad trestle. This has been a pretty hot topic as well, because when the creek runs really full, it pushes a bunch of brush down onto the trestle, and it certainly does back up water. It's been part of the alternatives almost from the start, and it's still a good element. This is a view downstream from the trestle. The creek downstream does start to open up a bit, has a little more capacity. Further downstream, it has the same width, but it is a bit overgrown, and I don't have any pictures further downstream than this. It starts to get a bit more difficult to photograph. Here's some of the rural areas that I'm certain you're all familiar with. This the bottom left picture is actually, I think that was from the 95 event. Quite a bit of water around there. Actually, it says on the, is it 98? Yep. Can you see that on your screen? Yep. Thank you. Thank you. And then where it's really devastating is right here in town. And so this was the 95 event. It was about a 1 in 60 year event. This was the 12,000 CFS that rolled into town, and my understanding was that in certain parts of town the water was 3 feet deep or more. So there was a lot of water in town. And Mayor, you were helping out on that event those days, and so I know you know a lot about it, probably more than I do, but here's a couple pictures to share with you. And then obviously the problems that we have with this type of flooding is risk to life and safety, flooding of the city and the surrounding areas, loss of public services, extensive flood damage in 95, 5.6 million. I have a little more information about that coming up. So the objectives of this project, this flood control project, is to reduce the probability of flooding in the study area, to reduce the damages in the area, and if we can, to include some environmentally sustainable design, and we do talk about that a bit in the channel mods. Some of the local concerns, of course, are to minimize the maintenance cost, the annual maintenance cost of this facility. And then one of the other ones that is more of a local concern than of Army Corps is to reach a 200-year level of protection. And this is important these days because the state of California passed a law a couple years back called SB 5. And SB 5 requires this 200-year level of protection for any new development especially with regard to annexation. So this is a critical piece for urban areas, and it's certainly been one of our objectives and concerns to achieve through this process. This is a map of the without project conditions. And so this is a 100-year event mapped out with, you can see the limits of it. One of the things that I commented earlier, and it applies to this one as well, is that the high probability of flooding. It's about a 1 in 10-year event that the city floods. And so this is the 100-year event, but even at the 10-year event, we see water in town, which is not good. This table shows the number of structures. And so this is pretty interesting, and it's a comparison between the rural and the urban areas. And so you can see the total number of structures combined is 1,365 structures in the study area, with the vast majority of those being in the urban area. I think it's 1,207 compared to 158. This is important because we use the number of structures to calculate the risk of damage to these structures and the value. And at the end of the feasibility, we need to calculate the cost of the project versus the benefits, or what we can protect. And so we have 1,365 structures with a total value, bottom right corner of this table, $300 million of value out there. That's what we're aiming to protect. And you can see if you look at the two urban columns, it's about $275 million of value that you have in your community. So most of the value is here in the urban area, which makes perfect sense. Out there in the rural area, just open land, doesn't have the same kind of risk to damage like homes and businesses do in town. And then what we did was we looked at the potential damage, the total dollar amount, and we tried to, or we didn't try to, we did put it into an annual damages type of a category. And if you look at the bottom right, that's $5,413,000 of annual damages that we're trying to protect. And we put it into an annual number because we also want to put the cost into an annual cost, which would include the capital cost spread over years and the maintenance costs per year. And so that's the magic number, the damages side, the $5.4 million per year. And then we start to look at alternatives, because now we know what the damages are, and then we can look at alternatives and what those costs would be. We studied 9 alternatives. The first one, of course, the no action, which that's not a very good option. But then we got into the real alternatives, and we'll go through these kind of quickly because we have quite a few slides to go through still. Alternative 1 was just to enlarge the channel and to remove all constrictions. But that's a tall order. It's a very long channel. It's very windy, and to truly enlarge it to handle 10 times the flow it has today became very, very expensive. So this alternative was not carried forward. Then we looked at what if we left the channel alone, but we put levees along the edges, set back. But remember, we're trying to hold 12, 15,000 CFS. So the setback was far, far back, and it became very, very expensive and impacted a lot of ag land and homes, and so this alternative was not carried forward. This alternative, number 3, is a Chevron levy. It was the first iteration of the Chevron levy, and if you look at the east-west segment of it, it was along Stir Road. This wasn't locally popular, but the concept was pretty solid. The idea of a levy to protect the city was pretty solid. So this alternative was carried forward, but it was modified, and we'll see that here in a moment. Then we looked at a bypass channel concept where you pick up the flow, around that Easton Road area, and you create a new channel for it to flow all the way to the river. But this new channel would be a very large pipe or maybe a dedicated canal. But to carry 12 or 15,000 CFS became very, very large and very expensive, so this alternative was not carried forward. This is the dry dam alternative. This was very popular, and from an engineering perspective, very, very effective. Hold the water before it gets down here on top of us. The problem was it impounded a large amount of acres that we don't own. In fact, it's acres that a conservation group does own, and they weren't willing to negotiate. And then, of course, the resource agencies would have fought us in court forever because of the sycamore grove and the potential loss to the 500-year-old trees down up there. So this alternative, and of course this alternative was costly because of some of those land issues, was not carried forward as either. The downstream dry dam was actually at the aggregate pit, and I imagine most of you are aware of where that is located. And it was pretty effective. We would have to build a small dam on the creek, but the value of that operating aggregate mine became very expensive. And so this alternative was not carried forward either. Now we're getting into some real alternatives that you'll see even further on. This was the Chevron Levy, and this is that modified concept where it was on Stir Road, and now it's pushed up to about the Lundy alignment. This gives the city more space to grow. It matches up with the general plan quite nicely. So it's a modified Chevron Levy with channel modifications. The channel mods would be from about the Easton Road area to quite a ways downstream of the trestle. The channel mods would increase the flow of the creek to about 3,500 CFS. This provided additional protection to the ag area. The ag area today has about a 2-year protection. With this channel mod, they would have about 10 years of protection, and the city with the Chevron Levy concept here would have the 200 years of protection. This alternative was carried forward and was continued to be studied. And then alternative 8 was kind of a hybrid of all of these. Had the Chevron Levy, had the channel mods, and it had a interceptor channel. But the cost became fairly high, well beyond the potential damages, so this alternative was dropped as well. And then, of course, alternative number 9, these are non-structural measures. These are, in essence, things that we can control today with educating the public, with land use decisions, with building permit decisions on when to issue and when not to issue. And this is something that we could do today. Not always easy to do, but it's possible to do. They're non-structural elements. Here's a table summarizing all of them. And I think what's important here is just to look off to the right and to see which ones we've carried forward. And they have the yes in blue next to them. And so the Chevron Levy is clearly being carried forward. Let me move down. The Chevron Levy with channel mods, and then of course the non-structural alternative is being carried forward. This is a picture of the Chevron Levy with the channel mods. It includes some descriptions in there about where we would stop and start. The Lundy Road, it would be on the east side of CCID Canal. It would stop at the southern area of the Newman Wasteway. And so you can see some of the detail here of this alternative that was moved forward. And then as we moved into the detailed study of this alternative, once we narrowed it down to these 2 or 3 alternatives, we started by really looking into the channel mods. And the channel mods became somewhat complicated because of land uses around it, some permanent crops that would have to be impounded, some homes that would be affected. And then when you compared that with the 3,500 CFS, the value of the mod, this became more challenging. And so when you looked at what this would protect, actually the cost became more than the land that we would protect. So this portion of the alternatives actually didn't survive very well, but we did study it quite a bit to get to that conclusion. Here's a little more design detail. We probably got to about 20% design level to understand some of the cost and some of the areas that we could protect with it. And then we had to do the economic evaluation. And so we looked at the rural and the urban, and then we combined them together. And what's real important here is to look at the incremental benefits, which is the column on the far right of the table. And if you look at the alternative that has the most incremental benefit, those are the winners. And so you can see the Chevron Levy is a clear winner as a total. And that's an important item to acknowledge there, because that's the alternative that carried forward into the draft document. So at the end of the study, but of course it's not really the end because the draft document is just that, it's a draft until we receive public comment. we had two alternatives, really. We had an NED, that's the Corps' most economical version of the levy, of the Chevron levy, and then the LPP, which is the locally preferred plan, and that's based upon the 200 years of protection with freeboard. And I think we'll see it in a bit, but I'll even say it here. The NED actually does protect against the same water elevation, the 200-year level of water, but it doesn't have freeboard, so it could not be a certified levy. And that's really important, especially to an urban area that in some cases is paying flood insurance. And so to avoid paying flood insurance, you have to be behind a certified levy to lift that floodplain cloud off of your land. And so the NED physically protects you, but doesn't give you the certification you need going forward. And the LPP does. And the difference is the freeboard. And there's about 3 foot of freeboard. And so it's the height of the levee system. So these two alternatives carried forward into the draft document. And we can see what they look like in action. And this is a computer model with project and without project. And you can see with project, the NED and the LPP, because remember, they protect you the same from a physical standpoint. There's a certification difference. You can see the area on the right-hand side and the kind of the bottom right, all that area is now not being flooded, which includes the entirety of the city of Newman and, of course, quite a bit of ag land around it. And so that's the project in action. And then here's a little more detail about just the Chevron levee without the channel mods. This is what the project would look like. I think the levee is about 7 miles in length. And so it's a pretty long levee. It does parallel the CCID canal on the east side. And here's a cross section of it. And this actually shows what I was trying to describe in terms of elevation. And the way I look at it is I like to start by looking at the 200-year of protection. So it's the LPP 200-year protection plus 3 foot of freeboard. And if you look to the left, it's 114.8 foot of elevation. And then if you go down to the NED levee height, it is 112.8. So you can see that the freeboard is within that range. And so they both protect the same water, but one has freeboard and the other does not. And so that's really the difference between the two alternatives. Here's a cross-section of the proposed Chevron levee. It's offset from the CCID canal because the CCID canal was built long ago and didn't have engineered field and isn't certified, and so we had to set away from it with this new concept. So that's a picture of that.
Can we go back two slides now? I noticed the 2 foot freeboard FEMA criteria.
Yes.
Would that assist if we went with the FEMA criteria in federal monies, or do
It would actually optimize your federal contribution, but it would not give you the 200-year level protection that the state requires with SB 5. And so it would be a good alternative from the federal side, but not from the state side.
So if we went to the 3 foot freeboard, does that mean that FEMA, because it's over and above their criteria, would not be as willing to give money to the project?
Well, that's a good question, and almost one of my near-in slides has that answer.
Oh, okay.
But
Sorry.
the answer is they will completely contribute their full amount on the LPP. But it took about 6 months to get them to approve that because it's a waiver of their normal procedures. Normally, they say, no, we will recommend only the NED, actually the one that's lower than the FEMA one, only that, and that's how we'll base our fair share of it, our federal share of it. And what we said was, well, that doesn't serve the community very well. We need to get to this higher level, and we want you to contribute your fair share to the higher level of protection. And so it took about 6 months to go through headquarters to get that waiver. In fact, your council and your city provided us a joint letter of support saying, hey, this is the right thing to do, Army Corps. Please help us out. Support us in this effort. They did. We just got that approval on, it was last Friday. And that's what kicked off this public review of this draft document. They weren't going to put the draft document out until we had that resolved because we didn't want them to recommend the wrong project. If they had, all this would have been for nothing. All the time that we've spent, all the money we've spent would have been for nothing because we could have never built the LPP, which is really the only project that we can build. So that's a great question, and the answer is yes, they are going to contribute their NED share.
Thank you.
So here is the summary of the economics, and this is an interesting table. It actually shows the cost of these projects. And so if you look at the top, the flood risk management first cost, that's their fancy words of just saying this is the construction value of these projects. The NEDs at 36 million and the LPPs at almost 45 million. And you can see the annual costs. And at the very bottom, this is another really important number, the benefit to cost ratio. The NED is a 1.61, which is a great number. Always has to be more than 1, otherwise you don't have a project. And the LPP is at 1.32. Now, should this project continue to go forward into design and into construction, that's the number that we'll compete with at the federal level. That's the number we take to Congress and say, hey, we've got a great project. It's a 1.32. And that's an important number. And it's well above 1, so it's a pretty solid project that we have before us. And then here is that the question, this policy exemption request, and it was finally granted. So we've already talked about that a bit. The recommendation of the draft document today is the LPP. It is the recommended project. And then a little bit about next steps. So the public review is January 7th, starting this past Monday through February 7th. They commented, the Corps did comment that they would even accept comments a little bit past that. So if people want to take some time to review the document, they have plenty of time. Then at that point, we will have to address any comments received. A final report will be prepared. It'll be submitted to SPD, that's the South Pacific Division. So the Corps has their divisions, and then they have their headquarters. So divisions out of San Francisco. And so that's where the final report will go, and then they will submit that to headquarters back in DC. And then at that point, it goes to Civil Works Review Board, which is in essence where it gets the final signature of approval, and then the document is done. It does have a 30-day final review, agency review, public review before the signature goes on it, but that's a pretty minor step. And then the final product is actually what they call a chief's report. It's after the document's finalized, it's finaled, your entitlement's there, and then they produce this chief's report, and that's what you take to get your federal funding as you move forward into the next phase. Some of the local challenges and the next steps that we're faced with is that prior to this final report, before they give the final approval on it, we do need to identify a local sponsor going forward for the design phase. And then, of course, after the chief's report and after we've identified a local sponsor, we can move into design. But the design phase, of course, requires a finance plan. And, the project looks good, the document looks good, but the finance is certainly a challenge of its own. We've actually requested the city council to consider being this local sponsor. And so we hope to work with you closely and go through some of these details, and hopefully we can identify the city of Newman as that local sponsor and move into the design element. But it's a tall order, and with financial constraints as they are today, I'm not sure that it's really completely doable today. So maybe the economy will help guide us in the future, but that's really the local challenge and the next steps as we move forward. So with that, turn it back to you for any questions or comments. I did leave us on the 100-year flood map with the project in place, and that's the kind of protection we can expect with this project, should we be able to move forward with all the details of finance and local sponsorship.
Matt, will you talk to council maybe about design cost?
Sure.
There's still 2 more phases, correct?
There's 2 more phases, and so the design estimate is, and I don't have the hard number in my head, but it's right around $6 million. And just from a rough rule of thumb kind of number, it's typically a 50-50 split with the feds. So when you move into a phase, it's not quite that. There's like a 60-40 in certain phases and all, but roughly half of that is what the local share would be moving forward. And that's the part that we all would have to come up with a finance strategy. And for the most part, what that means is an assessment district. And many people in the city, and even some in the ag areas, pay flood insurance. And the concept would be to replace your flood insurance payment with an assessment payment that funds the project, and now you're not in the floodplain any longer. But the concept is solid, but the actual action to make that happen is very challenging because you've got to market it and sell it to the general public, and it requires a simple majority and a vote of the people to make this happen. And that's no easy task these days, but that is the next step.
And then maybe talk a little bit about, remember we had the meeting with DWR and they were going to look into some legal authority questions. Did you ever get a response?
Not very clear, but in essence, what's going on there is that we'd always been hopeful that the state would partner with us on the local share. So you've got your federal share and your non-federal share. Now the non-federal is obviously the local share, but the state could be part of that as well. But this is going to be a local facility, a local levy, not a part of the state project system. And so what the state has said most recently is that they can't participate. It's not a part of their projects. And we said, well, great, let's make it a part of your projects. Well, no, we don't want to take on any new flood control facilities, liability, maintenance costs, and all that. And I don't know that you can blame them. They don't want to take on new liabilities either. But the way it stands today, they're not able to partner with us on the local share. So the local share is truly just a local share now.
Going back to one of the things you said, in order for you said replace flood insurance with assessment. But in order to do that, it would have to be approved at the LPP level.
Correct.
So if it was anything other than that, they're going to play flood insurance and figure out a way to finance it too.
Correct. You do need to get to, well, now, actually, that's not completely true. Actually, if you got to the 100-year level of protection, you could avoid the flood insurance. But then you would have the problem with SB 5. So the flood insurance goes away when you get to the 100-year protection. Now, we could go back to it. There's not a big difference between the 100-year and 200-year.
Yeah, I think it was 1 foot, I believe, as I recall.
It was something like that. It's not a big amount. And, certainly the prudent direction would be to be compliant with state law, SB 5. But technically, you could just build a 100-year FEMA levy, and you could avoid the flood insurance.
I think the FEMA levy had 2-foot freeboard, and the LPP had a 3. If I remember correctly. Anyway.
Right, that's right. And so it's a foot, 1.3 feet is the difference, it looks like. And my eyes aren't that great, but it looks like about a little more than a foot. Oh, there it is, 1.3. Yep. Yep. Any other thoughts or questions?
Michael, I have a question for you. Okay, our our northern business area and the build out toward the CCID canal, how would that, with the Chevron levy, that would pretty much limit us to this side of the canal, would it not?
Well, our general plan puts the CCID canal as our westernmost boundary anyway. As part of the general plan process, that was one of the measures we took to protect prime farmland, was to say we're not going to grow past this canal. We consider everything on the west side of the canal to be prime ag land.
And this would
now,
be on the
unfortunately,
east side.
at that point in time, the levee originally was placed on the west side of the CCID canal. It has since been moved to the east side. So as now, if this has been released, we will have to incorporate some of these project-specific things. What we're looking here is about 110, just over 110-foot swath along the eastern boundary of the CCID canal. So now we're going to have to build this into the northwest quadrant master plan area, for which, this was an area at this point in time that was kind of set aside for, the very low density, kind of more of the executive housing. So now we're going to have to increase that setback from the canal. So, but we have time to work that in. We have time to work that into the EIR because we're in the early stages of that.
Thank you.
Any other questions or comments? It's just been such a long, drawn-out process. Meeting with the Corps, meeting with the state, trying to get everybody on the same page, and I'm still not convinced it's ever going to happen in my lifetime, but who knows? But we certainly, on behalf of the city, we appreciate all the hard work that the county's put in towards the project, and meeting with the state and federal people to discuss it. I'm still amazed that in the early days, when there was 4 or 5 people involved in these meetings, now it's somewhere around 30 people every time you show up for a meeting. It's incredible. It's job security for the feds, I think. But at any rate, if there's no other questions for Matt?
Mayor, just real quick, I just want to make sure the council understands the big kudos goes to Mr. Matt Machado.
Absolutely.
He's really managed this project for the last couple of years and kept it on task, and a true project manager and a true problem solver, and he really kept the Army Corps of Engineers' feet to the fire. So he deserves a lot of credit for what we have today, which is actually a feasibility study. Him and Mr. David Jones, who is also in the county CEO's office, and Supervisor DeMartini. They really were diligent in making sure that we got to this stage. This was a big milestone, and they deserve all the credit for getting us there. So I want to make sure that gets acknowledged.
Okay. Thank you, Matt.
All right,
Appreciate
thank
it.
you.
Okay. We'll move to item 7, items from the public, non-agenda items. Any member of the public wish to address the council, now is the time to do it. Seeing none, we'll go to item 8, consent calendar. A's, waive all readings of ordinances and resolutions set by title. B's, approval of the warrants. C's, approval of the minutes of the December 11, 2012 regular meeting. D, adopt resolution number 2013, next to the number, approving the local transportation fund claim for fiscal year 2012, 2013, other purposes, and authorizing the finance director to execute the claim on behalf of the city of Newman. E is adopt resolution number 2013, next to number, approving Houston Enterprise Zone expansion.
I move that we can approve the consent calendar as read.
Second.
Motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries, thank you. Item 9 is public hearing. We don't have any this evening. Item 10, regular business. A is adopt resolution 2013, next to number, accepting irrevocable offer of dedication for street right-of-way for Hoyer Road safe routes to schools, cycle 10 improvement. Werner.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. As you stated, item before you tonight is to consider adopting a resolution accepting the irrevocable offer of dedication for the street right-of-way for Hoyer Road safe routes to schools, cycle 10 improvements. The City of Newman was successful in receiving a grant for $177,300 for the Safe Routes to School Cycle 10 program. This project consists of installing improvements connecting 2 existing sidewalk sections together between Yolo Middle School and Silva Avenue. This is an area that the students do use to traverse back and forth to the middle school, and at times in the winter, such as now, there's a lot of puddling and things like that going on in that area. So we were successful in receiving a grant to install curb gutters and sidewalks along that area and matching paving so the kids don't have to traverse through that. However, in order to install these improvements, it's necessary for us to acquire the right-of-way to put these improvements in. Fortunately for us, the school district does own that property, and they have signed the offer of dedication for those improvements. Therefore, the next step in this process is for the city to accept that offer of dedication and to sign and file the documents. Attached to the staff report is the offer of dedication from the school district and the legal description with a map showing those improvements, or the area for the improvements, and also the certificate of acceptance that the city would sign and file. Therefore, at staff's recommendation, the City Council adopt a resolution accepting the irrevocable offer of dedication for the street right-of-way improvements for the Hoyer Road Safe Routes to School Cycle 10 project, and authorize the city manager to sign and record the documents. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them for you.
Any questions, Garland? Comment? Council direction.
I move we adopt resolution number 2013, next to number, accepting the irrevocable offer of dedication for street right-of-way for the Hoyer Road Safe Routes to School Cycle 10 improvements.
I second that motion.
Motion and a second, all in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you.
Easy for me to say.
Thanks, Garner. Item B, City Council Reorganization Selection of Mayor Pro Tem and Committee Assignments. I guess that's,
I move that we appoint Councilman Hutchins as Mayor Pro Tem.
okay, we'll just, okay, well,
Was that
let's,
too soon? I'm sorry.
Michael, did you want to address it at all, or you want me to go ahead and do it?
Yeah, you can go ahead and Mayor.
Okay.
This one, Mayor.
Each cycle, obviously, we have people that are assigned to different committee assignments and different meetings. So there's several of these seats that I am the designee, such as Stan Cog, LAFCO, the Mayor's Committee. Yeah, let's see, there's a couple of them alternates on. In the past, we've had different council members appointed to different committees. And so I went through the list and saw, as I recall, who was appointed to different committees in the last rotation. And so my question was going to be, starting with number one, as Mayor Pro Tem, Councilmember Martina has served in that capacity in the last several years. My question was going to be, was there any interest of any other council member to serve in that role? So I guess now would be the time if I was going to ask who might be interested in serving as Mayor Pro Tem.
Well, I appreciate Councilmember Davis, but, Bob's doing a great job, and if he would, if he still desires to do it, I mean, I would do it, but if he still desires to do it, I will support him in that role.
Nick?
Concur.
Roberta?
Concur.
Okay. So Councilmember Martino then will remain as Mayor Pro Tem. And I am the designee for Stan Cog, and then as Mayor Pro Tem, Bob will be my alternate. Don, I'd like you to remain on the Alliance. You've been attending that, if you would remain in that role. In LAFCO, the City Selection Committee, I'll remain in that seat. And obviously I'll stay in item 5, the Stanislaus Mayor's Committee. And then for the League of California Cities Executive Committee, Don, you've been the appointed alternate with the CM as our alternate. I'd like for that to remain the same for consistency. School liaison, again, I think for the sake of consistency, I would like to see Bob and Nick, if you remain on that.
Mayor, actually, I think Dawn has, Nick's schedule really prevents him from making a lot of those
Okay.
meetings. I think
That's right, they switched, huh?
Yeah, I think he deferred to
They
Dawn. Is that-
switched. Okay, that's right, I remember, okay.
Could I say something about that? Not that I don't mind going to the meetings, but I've noticed, and Michael, I know there's always a reason, but I think we've had one meeting in the last 6 months.
Yeah, this month we're meeting to discuss master plan and a few other things, so
Was it canceled?
we'll meet this month in January. Because it's the third Tuesday, correct?
It showed canceled on the thing,
Oh.
that's why,
I think that was a typo.
that
I
did, or did
apologize.
I misread something?
Yeah, I apologize. We are scheduled to meet this a week from today for 2 on
Okay,
2.
on January the 15th?
Yes.
So it isn't canceled,
It
okay.
is not canceled. My apologies, that's my fault for not catching that.
Okay, so Councilmember Martina and Councilmember Hutchins will serve as the two appointed, and we need an alternate. Councilmember Davis, you want to be the alternate?
Yes.
Okay, for the Infrastructure Committee, it was, let's see, I think Councilmember Davis and Candia served on that previously. How often does that meet?
Never has.
So that's easy
an easy
committee.
Great, it's a great.
Would you like to remain on that one? If it doesn't interrupt your schedule? All right. For the economic development, as the city manager and myself, I haven't made too many of those. Michael, you've been making those meetings?
I make about every third one.
Okay. And I think I'm supposed to be one of those people on that one, if I remember right. Is that correct? I think they
Let me look at the last
say the
year's
mayor's
thing.
got
It
to be
says-
part of that. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't think it's, the EDAC bylaws aren't specific as to which council
Okay,
member.
well, if you'll
Councilmember
continue.
Brennan's there, and
Okay.
there's a few other, and Mayor, the guy from Modesto.
Yeah, Muratori.
Yeah, Matori's there,
Okay.
so.
Does anybody else have any interest of maybe serving on that committee? Maybe attend those meetings when the city manager cannot? Everybody raise your hand at once.
It depends when the meetings are.
Meetings are
Usually on
in the evening at 6 PM.
Thursdays.
Where?
Thursdays, yes.
Downtown.
At the 1010 building in Modesto, in the
basement.
basement, the small room there.
Thanks, Councilmember Candia. I appreciate that.
Okay.
I appreciate you volunteering to fill that spot.
Thanks.
Okay, the Crow's Landing Airfield, West Side Economic Development, does that ever meet?
I think that committee is no longer active. I didn't see them pull it up when they had some recent changes
Mm-hmm.
and proposals that were going on with that, so, and I know the proposals are coming in at the first of next month. So we haven't gotten any notice. About
Councilmember
it.
Davis has served on that. I take it you've never been to any of those meetings? They've never met? Shall we just leave that filled with a person to, should they ever decide to revive that?
Yeah, we'll know in the next,
Okay.
we'll know in the next 60 days if they're going to
Okay.
revive it.
Roberta, then we'll just leave you on that. And Councilmember Martinez, would you like to be the alternate for that? Thanks. And the Tosca, I'm a member of the Tosca board, but the council is usually represented by a member, and I think, and Councilmember Hutchins has served on that in the past. Unless anybody else would like to serve as a council representative, I would leave Don in that spot unless somebody else wants to do it.
Sounds good.
Okay.
I've been letting you pretty well handle that one.
Yeah, they're pretty uneventful. And the Solid Waste Task Force, it's been our Public Works Director and Public Works Supervisor, so I'll probably just leave that the same. Okay. Okay, and then the Chamber of Commerce, it's been Nick and Bob have served on that.
I'll stay on it.
Okay. Bob, stay? Okay. And the West Side Theater liaison, Councilmember Hutchins is the designee and Councilmember Davis is the alternate.
Just, and thanks, Mike, for putting that change in there. AB 1224 back in 2010 says if you have a public benefit board and you have the city is giving to that board and we have quote-unquote ad hoc members, there is no such thing as a non-voting member anymore. So whoever we assign to that, whether it be me or anybody else, is
Is now
going to be
a
a
voting
voting
member,
member of the
yes.
board.
Yeah.
And so they made that change. I brought that to their attention a couple of months ago, and they went ahead and made that change. I also advised them that because of that, they also have to follow the Brown Act. So they're going to be focusing on getting their agendas out on time and everything like that.
That'd be a good change, Don.
Yeah.
Yeah. You say they've had some issues.
So if somebody else wants to take that.
No, I,
That's an interesting one.
No, I'll stay there. That's
okay.
fine.
And, you know, Roberta, how about, I'll take the alternate on that. I have some interest. I'll take the alternate and be in for the West Side Theater. I have some interaction with them, so I'll go as the alternate. And then for the Public Safety Committee, it's myself and Councilmember Hutchins, unless anybody else has an interest of sitting on that. Okay, I'll remain, and Councilmember Hutchins as well. And then the Countywide Disaster Council, again, it's myself and Councilmember Hutchins in the past, unless anybody else has a burning desire to sit on that council.
Typically during the daytime, too.
Yeah.
I will say this about this disaster council, they are finally getting off of it. They're going to start getting city managers involved
Yes.
in the disaster council, and they're coming up with a new plan. You should have been receiving some emails on some of the
Yeah,
stuff
we
they're
had
doing.
CEO Nino at our last city manager meeting come and talk about it and kind of get everybody prepped, so.
I just got drafted on that, too.
Yes, I know, yeah,
I
you
learned-
did.
I learned via email I was appointed as.
You missed the meeting?
Well, that was, I think you got drafted because how many cities that are on
Yeah.
it do you the council for?
And the San Joaquin Valley Air Pollution Control District Special City Selection Committee, we need one and an alternate. And it looks like it's been Councilmember Hutchins as the designee, and looks like I'm the alternate. Have you ever met with them, Don?
Yes, I've met once, and we've got another meeting coming up, January 29th, right?
Let's not
We-
upset
They
the
meet
apple
about
cart.
once every 2 years when they have to put somebody else on the board. That's pretty much what they do, is we'll meet in Modesto, and then they will video conference between 10 other places, and we all vote. That's pretty much the way that thing goes.
Okay. Well, again, let's not upset the apple cart, so let's leave you there. How's that? And then the West Side Health Care Task Force, it's been the Councilmember Candia and Martinez. You want to remain on that?
That's the best one of the whole bunch.
Are they serve lunch?
No, healthcare for the west side.
Okay.
That's what makes it important.
That has been good. And then the Oristimba Creek Flood Control, I'll remain on that committee. So, you got all that, Mikey? All right. Thank you, everybody, for volunteering. Okay.
Or as my son says, you've been voluntold.
Okay, that completes item B. We'll go to item 11. Supervisor DeMartini's not here. Item 12, items from city manager. Michael?
Thank you, Mayor. Just a update. As you know, we have a legal matter, and we filed a demur on it, and unfortunately, we were unsuccessful. The attorneys and I will be conferencing either later this week or early next week, and probably have this back on closed session for you at your next meeting. So just wanted to give you a heads up that that will be forthcoming. Last year, and in the prior years as well, Stanislaus County Travel and Tourism does a annual winter event. Last year, we donated $200, so if we can just kind of with a nod of the head get the concurrence, we'll go ahead and use that again this year and use that at a community promotions if I'm not seeing any. Yeah, okay. We have a Founders Day, so I don't have to use that Kwaski meeting, a Founders Day Planning Committee meeting tomorrow at 6 p.m. So we're going to kind of kick it into high gear as we come down the home stretch. We'll have a full staff there to really start working out the logistics of it all. I think you're going to start seeing it's going to start coming together pretty quickly. Right now, based on the schedule that's out there, it's a 3-day event. The last weekend in April, starting with Friday evening in the plaza, and then we'll move to Founders Park, or Pioneer Park as we know it, for Saturday and Sunday activities. At this point in time, there's a lot of activities, including hot air balloon lift off on Sunday morning and a few other things, so we're quite excited about that. And the book's coming along. We have a lot of support from our local businesses in terms of buying ads. We almost have that whole entire book paid for. So that's great. That's going to be money that we can then put back into the event that we're not having to put on the books. Tomorrow night's agenda, if anybody wants to show up, we have some mock, at least some on paper print copies of the banners we want to put up. So at this point in time, we anticipate that the banners would be hung in the downtown all year long. And again, it's going to use kind of a Centennial theme of, the railroad, because it was really the railroad that contributed to the founding of Newman. And so they're going to have a railroad type theme on them. There'll be two different designs, one on the front and one on the back. So you're facing one way, but on the opposite side of the street, on the street light, it'll be facing the other way, so you'll see both of them at the same time. So, and then we're also looking for sponsors right now that may want. We've reached out to a couple different groups, but no one's taken it yet. But to sponsor the purchase of those banners and maybe put their name on the bottom to show that their support. So hopefully we'll get a sponsor for that. It's about $2,500. As part of that, we'll be doing another fundraiser. I think Stephanie's going to talk about that, so I'm not going to take that. Just a FYI for the community, on January 21st, in observance of Martin Luther King Jr. Day, city offices will be closed. Staff is working on if any of you have been to the Louis J, it's been a number of years since we've done some significant improvements on there. So we're trying to develop a long-term plan that we can come out and do some investment into that building and maybe get it back up to what it was a number of years ago, and as a community center that people can be proud to hold their events in. So there are some ADA, bathroom, kitchen type things that we need to address, and that'll be a part of it. So in the either next meeting or the weekend after, or the meeting afterwards, we'll come to you with a plan and a budget that we can get approved. Tomorrow, Garner, Lance, and I will be going to Sacramento to wrestle with the director of the Regional Water Quality Control Board. We're not really getting the answers that we want, or we're not feeling we're making progress through regular channels with staff. So we called a meeting with the director, and I think, Mayor, you were there last time when we got Pamela Creedon in our Assemblywoman's office, and so we're having to do the same again. So this time we're not meeting in one of our elected's office. We're just going to meet in their office. So hopefully we'll come back at our next meeting with some good news. The feasibility study that you saw today by Mr. Machado, the Public Works Director from the county, is also going to be put online on our website. It already is. It's a big file, so if any of the community want to see it, it's going to take a little while for it to download. Just give it a little bit of time. Public Safety Committee, for which Mayor Caton and Councilman Hutchins are on, we're trying to set up a joint meeting with West Stand Fire Protection and the City of Patterson. So hopefully that's going to I'll get a couple dates here in the next couple weeks so we can set that up and start talking about that. And that's all that I had. If you had any questions for me.
Questions or comments for Michael? All right, thank you. Okay, staff. Chief, anything?
I have a quick couple things. I'd like to thank everyone, the community, for celebrating safely over the holidays. It's our first meeting since then. I did come out and work on New Year's Eve. It was a very uneventful New Year's Eve. Of course, there were the gunshots, which we always discourage, but we had minor calls for that, aerial fireworks, very uneventful. We had one drunk driving that night, so the majority of the people celebrated safely, and we always encourage that and support that. Remind everyone to check us out on our Facebook. We put up-to-date information on there on things that are happening in the community. You can also find our dogs for adoption on there and on Pet Finder also. And new to the Facebook community is the Canine Association page, so you can go look on their Facebook, like them, and see what's going on in the Canine Association. With that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Questions or comments for Chief?
Any further on our little incident on Merced the other night?
Unfortunately, no. The victims at the residence are fairly uncooperative. He's referring to the shooting that happened at early morning last week. The victims are very uncooperative with us. Not a whole lot of witnesses out at 5 o'clock in the morning. We did get a partial description of a vehicle, which was a dark colored Honda type vehicle with its lights off, headed northbound on T Street. That's about all we have to go on. So without the help of the community, it's on Crime Stoppers. So if anyone out there knows anything about it, feel free to reach out. Officer Cooksey is investigating that, so any information referred to him.
1,200, it was,
1200 block of Merced.
Okay. Stephanie, anything?
A few things to carry on the Kwaski Centennial fundraiser tickets. There are some tickets available still. The fundraiser is this Monday, January 14th from 4 to 7 at the LJ Newman building. Anybody wants to buy a last minute ticket, come on by City Hall. They're $8 a piece and it's a pretty generous meal, so hopefully people out in TV land will want to purchase one. The day after tomorrow, which is Thursday the 10th, we have a skate park committee meeting. The committee was authorized by the council, so it'll be the first meeting to discuss potential designs, get some community input, form create the committee, get some people that be actual members, and we look forward to having public there. So we invite everyone to attend. Also wanted to tell the council that the Dollar General site plan review was approved at December's Planning Commission. So now they're in the plan check phase. Once all the plans are worked on and approved, they anticipate to go to construction in the summer. Hopefully, end of the summer, we'll actually have the store grand opening, so that's good news. And the non-motorized transportation plan is going to the Planning Commission this month for review and recommendation to the council. It's also concurrently going through its CEQA review, so that way we can take it to council next month for your review and possible approval or adoption. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions, comments? Thank you, Steph. Garner.
Thank you, Mayor. Update on some of the projects we're working on. The Highway 33 traffic signal project, staff is meeting this week with the consultant to go over the 65% submittal of the plans, which then also will be submitted to Caltrans to get their review. That'll narrow down the improvements that we're looking at, and we'll be able to move that project forward. The 2013 street project, we're putting together a project right now. We're scoping it. It looks like the improvements we're looking at for this project will be to finish the overlays on P Street and also to tear out and reconstruct patches by the school district, by the school over there. So that project's coming together. We've got the funding for that. It's an LTF funds, local transportation funding for that. And then hopefully in a couple more years, then we'll come in and do some more slurry seal projects throughout some of the older parts of town for street maintenance. Memorial building improvements, the city manager talked about that. We've got some estimates together, and I'll be bringing a presentation back to council on that for direction. We're also going to be looking at reassessing fees for our buildings and our parks at the same time to make sure we're recovering our costs associated with renting these facilities and the improvements and maintenance on those facilities. Some other housekeeping items. We have the Christmas tree lights. We are going to leave the Christmas tree lights up in the plaza and on Main Street until January 14th. And at that time, they'll be coming down. Currently, we're taking down just the side streets only. Then on January 14th, those rest of the lights will be coming out. On January 21st, we have a contractor come in to start pruning and shaping our downtown trees, which haven't been pruned in several years. That'll also help us for the following year when we do our Christmas tree lights again. The trees will be better shaped. We'll be able to add more lights, and it'll be a lot more appealing during that time of year. And that's all I have. If there's any questions, I'll be happy to answer them.
Questions or comments, Garner?
not on that project, but on Oristimba Road, where it goes westbound from T Street. How far out is that, ours?
I don't have the answer for that. I know it goes to the Memorial Building.
Yeah, at least to the Memorial Building.
Yeah, it's probably to the Memorial Building, but typically, it's I want to tell you till the end of the high school. Because when the high school becomes part of the city, they make you take the road, so it just depends on when that part came. But we can look at the LAFCO map and get back to you if you'd like.
Well, the reason I ask that is that road just beyond Louis Newman is just really getting worse and worse and worse. And so, but I wasn't sure whether we actually, where our boundaries ended out there on that end.
Let me look at our LAFCO map and I'll email you the answers on that.
Okay.
One last thing I did forget is the Director of Public Works for the Stanislaus County was here earlier. Matt Machado did mention that they're going to be doing some overlay work on some streets in our area this spring. He's going to get those locations to me, and I'll bring those back to council.
Great. Anything else? Okay. We are, I'm sorry, we're not adjourned. Council members. No ball game to watch or anything, I'm sorry. Councilmember Candia, anything? Councilmember Martina?
I'm not happy about Alabama.
They put a pretty good whooping on Notre Dame, didn't they?
Yeah. Good Catholic school they beat, too.
Yeah, they beat them up pretty good.
I have nothing.
Yeah. I pocket a little change. Councilmember Hutchins?
Just that next week I'll be going up to the League of California Cities for the Public Works Committee meeting and also for the Housing and Economic Development meeting to see what kind of, I know the supermajority is now in, and I know there's already some stuff coming down the pike from what I'm hearing, so it's going to be interesting. I'll try to bring back some information from that when I come back at the next meeting.
Good. Councilmember Davis?
I don't have anything.
And I don't have anything. Now we're adjourned. Thank you.
Oh, Mayor, I forgot, go Seahawks.